Hello, my name is Dr. Chris Heeb, the Debt Doctor, and I welcome you to the Debt Doctor 911 podcast, where each week I, along with my dear friend and financial expert Richard Schaffer, will shift your focus from living paycheck to paycheck to a more solution-based process that will ultimately revolutionize your overall financial health. We will expose the hidden secrets about our financial system that banks and lenders never tell you about when it comes to getting rid of your debt and building your wealth. So make sure to listen every Thursday as we resuscitate your financial health and keep the lenders from flatlining your financial goals. All here on Debt Doctor 911. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Debt Doctor 911 podcast. This is Dr. Chris Heeb, also known as the Debt Doctor, and I'm here with my wonderful friend, good buddy, and financial expert, Richard Schaffer. Richard, how are you?
I'm doing really, really well, Chris. Good to be on the show today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Hey, listen, we got a lot to talk about today, and we'll get right to it. We have first segment's going to be talking about the state of the economy and whether or not people are truly prepared for what may be happening here in the near future. We also have a great question from Rick, one of our listeners from Wilmington, North Carolina. I've actually been there. It's a nice little town, kind of close to the beach, I believe, or on the East Coast. And we're going to talk about the state of the economy and really kind of dive into, Richard, what you're seeing, from your perspective down there in the wonderful southeast area of the country. And I'll also give you my perspective on what I'm seeing, because we discussed this earlier, and we're starting to see some conflicting information coming out on whether or not the economy is strong. We're seeing people are spending a hell of a lot more money or putting more money on credit. Our debt is increasing. A lot of different things are going on right now, and it's kind of I would say, kind of an unstable situation. So we want to talk more about that today too. And then we're going to talk about our next podcast, and we're going to have a special guest. We're excited about that. So let's get right into it. Hey, listen, anyone that's listening to our show, if you want to listen to our previous podcast, make sure you go to debtdoctor911.com. And then don't forget, we offer a free payoff analysis. Obviously, hey, we're talking about debt. Okay, that's why they call me the Debt Doctor. We're talking about debt in ways that you can eliminate that debt and you can create a solid financial foundation. So make sure you go to moneymaxnow.com. That's moneymaxnow.com, and schedule yourself a free payoff analysis. See exactly what we can do to help you. But before we get started, Rich, I do want to talk about this question that one of our listeners sent in. Rick from Wilmington, North Carolina. I'd like to get your feedback on this. His question is an emergency fund a good thing to have in today's uncertain times? Now, I'm sure a lot of us out there understand what an emergency fund is, but for some of you that are listening to us and have no idea what an emergency fund is, let me give you just kind of a brief definition of what it is. An emergency fund allows you to live for a few months if you lose your job, or if something unexpected comes up that costs a fair chunk of money to cover. Most experts believe you should have enough money in your emergency fund to cover at least 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. So really, everyone, it's about putting money aside and saving it for a rainy day in case what breaks loose, you lose your job and you still got to pay bills, right? I mean, is that a pretty good explanation, Richard?
Yeah, it really, really is. One of the two things I'd probably add to that is, number one, we're not necessarily endorsing, we could, and we perhaps might at another occasion, we're not necessarily endorsing a specific type of vehicle to be used for an emergency fund. We can talk about that on a subsequent podcast as we start to expand upon our debt to wealth, all-encompassing strategy. But I will add the caveat that 3 to 6 months for most people is probably adequate. But I will tell you, for those that are self-employed, they need to be thinking more like in the 6 month to 12-month window, because obviously their income is a lot more volatile, a lot more uncertain, and typically can be impacted much more quickly and with little notice, right? Many people that work in commission sales, as an example, real estate agents will tell you this, they could have, multiple closings back to back and could go, for quite a long time without doing so. So I think that's true in a lot of different fields. So I think that's an important additional consideration for people to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I'm curious. Oh, your thoughts. I mean, a lot of people talk. The ideal situation from a financial standpoint is to have those funds available. The difficult part of it is actually putting aside those funds.
Hmm.
That actually setting up a game plan to know that you're going to move a certain amount of money into your savings account and make sure, or a special savings account that you've set up, so that that money is there, it's parked there, and that it will be utilized if in fact something horrible happens, whether it's you lose your job, or the economy hits the tank and things slow down. um, but that's a commonplace though with wealthy people. They sock away a lot of cash
Hmm.
and have it, I mean, not literally putting it under their mattress, but maybe some do. But they have money ready to go in case of some type of financial issue, that may, obviously cause problems. But why is it that they do that, in most middle class to lower class individuals don't? I just don't get it.
I think a lot of that thought process is, and I think we've all been there, so this isn't like we can't relate to it, but I think it kind of dovetails into the, although there's a level of truth to it, the false premise that you got to have money to make money, and that only wealthy people have the money. So if I had more money, I would do more of X, Y, and Z. Well, one of the very first shows we had, we kind of underscored the age old little statement that said the problem with many people today, especially in our society, our very consumer based, marketed society, is that we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we largely don't even know or probably don't even like. One of the major concepts here, and we're going to talk more and more about this, Chris, I think, moving forward, but it's a matter of developing the pay yourself first mentality, right? It's that you save first and you spend what's left, instead of spending first and saving what's left. So I think that's a really, really important. And I don't care if it's, when I first started my first mutual fund when I was 18, it was Templeton Foreign Fund, and it was $25 a month. That was the minimum. You could actually get into that fund for as low as $25 a month directly taken out of what they call PAC, a pre-authorized check situation. And then went to 50 and 100 and et cetera. But I think sometimes it's not so much the dollar amount, it is the consistency and developing systems that do it automatically, but prioritizing. My daughter's 11 years old. I talk to her about this all the time now. Even when I give her allowances or gifts for something, I say, now I tell her she has to save half of it, which I'm probably a little extreme for her, but I tell her I want you at least save 25% of it. And I think it's all about saying it's found money, especially for a child because they don't have any expenses. But you start developing that mentality that I'll say, what are you going to buy with it? I'll say, oh, but what are you going to save with it? What are you going to buy eventually when you can save it? So I think that we developed such an immediate gratification mentality in our society, Chris, that we're not thinking that. That's one of the reasons you and I talk a lot about financial forecasting and using unique systems and strategies, and a powerful platform that shows you the time value and the long-term impact of those decisions.
Absolutely. I would answer your question for Rick is simply by this: figure out exactly what your monthly expenses are. Also look at your debt service, okay, the monies that you're paying towards your debts. Add that up, and that will establish your monthly, okay, responsibility financially. Multiply that by 3, then by 6, and then break down what amount of money per month do I need to consistently put aside until I actually can build that reserve up. Now, you and I both know, with the technology that we use, that we have at our fingertips, at our disposal, we can actually program and determine, actually can determine exactly what that amount would be, and actually be able to put it into the system to actually help us do that, so we reach that goal faster than we could ever imagine.
Yeah, very well
Um,
said.
yeah, very good. Okay, so let's segue right into what you're seeing right now in regards to the state of our economy. Because what I've seen right now, and it's kind of funny you brought up the Franklin Templeton funds, um, but they've designed something called the Anatomy of a Recession, and it's really to deliver thoughtful perspectives on the state of the U.S. economy. Um, what they're seeing right now is, and we talked about this earlier, that the forecast, the financial forecast out there right now is looking at potential, recession like model. But what they're telling me here is that we're in an expansion, which is basically a normal state of the U.S. economy. Um, but you and I both know that's not what we're seeing. We're not
Mhm.
seeing that out there right now. And people, listeners of our show need to be aware that they need to make sure they have their financial house in order. because there is some uncertain things that could be happening here shortly in the short term and also the long term. Richard, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hate to be the contrarian, but many years ago, about 15, 16 years ago, and I had a chance to do a little bit of a cameo stint on CNBC, but I got a chance to do an article in Investors Business Daily. And the whole concept of it was, hey, what do you see happening over the next, 3 to 5 years in the economy? And, I've been in the industry for a long time at that point already. And I said, well, and more specifically, they were asking about the real estate market. And I said, well, I think that every one of the individuals that are reading this article should focus on developing an opportunity fund. I said, because I think we're going to see the biggest real estate crash in history in the next 12 to 18 months. Now, it's probably off that mark by about maybe 6 months, but there was a lot of, it wasn't just conjecture. And so I'll give you a couple of things. And this isn't meant to be gloom and doom. That's never been my perspective. I tend to look for the opportunities and things and be positive as you are, Chris. But you got to take a couple of things into account. You and I discussed this recently, right? Well, I'll give you a perfect anecdotal situation. So I had to call Southwest Airlines customer service over something that had recently transpired on a flight that I had that got canceled, et cetera. Guess how long I was on hold?
30 minutes.
84 minutes.
Holy
Now,
smokes.
the point I say that, and I was calling at 10 o'clock at night. Now, my point behind saying that is, if we're in expansion mode, please tell me why every single place you deal with has less and less staff. I rented a car up in New Hampshire. I was visiting my daughter recently. It was almost $200 a day. I used to be able to rent those for 30 or 40.
Yeah,
Now,
I've seen that same thing too. It's
because there was
outrageous.
less
The
cars.
prices have went through the roof.
Yeah, so this is where expansion, I think, is a lot of creative marketing. So I'll give you a couple of things that are things to consider. We're not going to give a conclusion, Chris, but I want those that are listening to this podcast to be thinking about these factors, okay? Yes, rates are insanely low, historically speaking. Now, we talk about the true cost of money and interest volume, but just from a strict note rate interest standpoint, they're obviously very low. But here's what we do know. And it's a complicated process, so all the details, I won't get into the heavy minutia of it, Chris, but when the government pulls back on buying what we call bonds or mortgage-backed securities, then bonds actually, the interest rate goes up, which means, or actually goes down, which means the yield goes up. And that pushes mortgage rates up. It's not based on prime rate and so forth. That's a very, very loose connection. It's really based on mortgage-backed securities and 10-year bond yields. But the reason I'm getting into that mesh there is that interest rates are going to go up. Now, I'm not saying they're going to go to 5 or 6% tomorrow, but even if they dip into the fours next year, that has a big impact on affordability. Number two, inflation. We see it all over the place. We see costs going crazy, right? Look at what gasoline is right now. But look at housing costs. Look at lumber. Look at the basic supplies necessary. Those costs have gone up 15, 20, 30%. That impacts affordability. Then you add taxes that are obviously slated to be increasing over the next couple of years. Then you add the fact that evictions have been put off for 2 more months, but that's going to end in October. And foreclosures, that moratorium was lifted a couple of weeks ago, which means as that curve starts shifting in the next 2, 3, 4 months, you're going to see more and more of these properties on the market. Therefore, it's going to shift and those values are going to drop because there's going to be more inventory. But last but not least, Chris, this is the thing I think about the most. Income is going up by about 2.6% a year. How can houses continue to go up 12, 15, 20, 25% a year? That's not a mathematically sustainable model. So people can draw their own conclusions. I'm not saying that the sky is falling and the bottom is going to drop out tomorrow, but I feel very, very strongly in the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see a shift. We're going to see a correction. Now, when, how much, and how long, nobody knows. But I think that's why when you start talking about emergency fund and or I start alluding to an opportunity fund, I have a bunch of friends of mine right now that have recently sold their places that opted not to get right back into another house. They opted to set aside that money and play the wait and see game and rent for a year or so and see what happens in the market. Now, I'm not endorsing whether that's the right idea or not, but it's certainly something that I wouldn't look down upon. So I think there's a number of things that are happening right now, all simultaneously, but they all point to some of the same things. I'm not saying we're going to have a repeat of 2008-9. There was some very extraordinary things that led to that. But I think that there are some similar dynamics, and history teaches us that these things happen. And you add to that we've had a 10, even 11, 12-year bull market, if you want to call it that, because the bottom was in February 2009. Now you're talking 12 years. That's almost unprecedented. So I think prudence dictates that we start thinking about getting our debt under control, trying to get out of debt, develop an emergency fund, and start having a long-term, more conservative strategy where people are looking to shift into a little bit more safety-laden investment opportunities and so forth.
On that note, Rich, we're going to take a break here because we need to make sure this podcast is paid for. So everyone, hang in there for just a minute or so. We'll be right back. These days, American consumers are struggling just to keep pace with rising prices for basic staples. Are you stressed that you live paycheck to paycheck? Are you frustrated that you cannot seem to get ahead, always backing yourself into a financial corner? Are you hopeless that your financial predicament will never improve and you are just going to have to live with it forever? Recognizing that you need to do something about your debts is an important first step on your road to financial independence. Whether your debt problems have become a pressing emergency or you're ready to start that journey to financial freedom, you have a plausible option at your disposal. It's called the Money Max account, a financial tool that will transform your financial life. Denise says this is the best debt reduction system we have ever seen. We reduced our mortgage payoff date from 27.5 years to 8.3 years. Here's how you get started. Write this down. Go to moneymaxnow.com. Schedule your free payoff analysis to find out your exact debt-free date, how much you are going to save, and what wealth you could build for your future. It's free, and there's no obligation whatsoever. That's moneymaxnow.com. moneymaxnow.com. Now is the time to start that journey to completely eliminate your debt and start building your wealth. Go to moneymaxnow.com to schedule your free payoff analysis. That's moneymaxnow.com. Welcome back to Debt Doctor 911 with your host, Chris Heeb. I'm known as the Debt Doctor, and we have our financial expert and my good friend, Richard Schaffer, with us on today's segment. Hey, you know what, Richard, you alluded to something that, I'm getting worried about in regards to what could possibly happen here in the near future. I talk with a lot of people all over the country, and one of the things they're talking about right now is how easy it is to get money, that the interest rates are so low that the cost of getting money from banks is so low that it's so advantageous for people now to get loans, to buy homes. I swear I'm starting to see this cycle again. Okay, where the banks and the lenders are just throwing money out there. I don't know if they're trying to stimulate the economy, trying to get people buying things. Again, I'm seeing this potential disaster occurring again with the mortgages, and I know you have some interesting insight to that. Tell our listeners more about what you're seeing and the concerns you're starting to notice when it comes to lending out this money.
Well, there's an interesting school of thought that says, it's the old school that when people are buying, you should be selling, and when they're selling, you should be buying. I think that that's a little contrarian by nature, but there's some truth to that in the sense that, I don't want to use the political perspective of it, but, following the masses is ultimately going to lead to some trouble. And so when you start seeing people become lulled into sleep and saying, yeah, money is so cheap, loans are so cheap, money's so freely available, that's when you start worrying. It's like the buy on rumor, sell on news concept, right? By the time the average person is buying whatever's hot, that window is probably collapsed. And I think the same thing could apply to lending. And I'll give you a great example of that, Chris. Having worked in this space for quite some time, and also working in the general financial space, but also the mortgage industry, when one of the first things that started happening very quickly, the market peaked in 2006 years ago, started to level off in 2007, and started to retreat pretty quickly in 2008. Well, it wasn't long before not only were a lot of banks going out of business, but prior to that, they started to preemptively close or freeze a lot of HELOCs, a lot of home equity lines of credit, because they knew the values were dropping. Well, here's what we know for sure. There's at least two banks, major banks, but one in particular, which for reasons I won't necessarily mention who they are at this point, but they're already putting in internal memos talking about the fact that they're getting ready to start putting in policy that not that they're going to freeze existing lines, but they're going to stop issuing new home equity lines of credit. Now, one thing's for sure, I guarantee you that major national multi-billion-dollar banks have a little bit better finger on the pulse of what's really coming down the pike than we do, right? They've obviously are highly engaged in that process. So the only reason they would do that is because they already have genuine concerns that values are going to drop. Now, they don't have to drop 30, 40, 50, 60% like they did back 15 years ago. But even a 5, 10% drop could be significant in some of these cases. because I think sometimes when people forget, Chris, and we'll probably talk about this again on a future call, but I think we alluded to it many, many months ago. Rate of return and market myths, the way these things are calculated is very deceptive. So if you had a $300,000 house and it increased by 10%, well, you now have got 330,000. If it drops, 10%, well, you've lost more, right? Because obviously it's a bigger number. And I think you're going to see a bigger impact from that drop than you did the gains. And I think it can happen much more quickly than a lot of people think.
Yeah, I'm real concerned about how, we see this right now, and we talk a lot about this in previous podcasts about the fact that there's not a lot of homes out there available for people to purchase, and the prices are going through the roof. And it seems as though lenders are kind of not even worried about that. They're just throwing the money out there. And really give people perspective on these HELOCs, these home equity lines of credit. Okay, so when people are getting these HELOCs, they're putting their houses, okay, up as collateral, correct?
Mhm.
So
Correct.
if they have $200,000 or $300,000 equity in their home and they want to get a HELOC, home equity line of credit, they're going to put their house up maybe to pull $50,000 out cash they can use to do whatever. We would recommend them do something else with it. But and everyone, please understand, we're not giving any kind of financial advice here. We're not financial advisors or have any type of professional expertise when it comes to that. We have to protect ourselves. Okay, so we're just
I
giving.
do. I would just not disclaim that I'm not an accountant. That'd be the only part that I would caveat there in the event for tax
Sure.
advice.
Sure, but it is worrisome. Okay, I mean, and when you start to see, like you've said, banks and lenders starting to show internal memos on what could possibly be coming down the pipe here, it's important for us to pay attention. Okay, because you know I've told a lot of people, I've given them my personal opinion on stocks and bonds right now. I personally am on the sidelines. I just kind of want to wait and see. I really don't know what's going to happen over the next 6 months. I think it'd be better for people to be safe than sorry.
Mhm.
But they do need to recognize these indicators that are coming out right now, and really start to educate themselves. Okay, and I think that's the most important thing. As we start to tie up our podcast today, is it's so important for people to get educated. You need to know and
Absolutely.
understand exactly what your money is doing for you. You need to have protective devices or mechanisms set up, such as an emergency fund, which Rick from Wilmington, North Carolina, talked about. There are other things that you need to pay attention to in regards to your finances, the debt that you have. I'm sure, Richard, you would agree with me that it would be important or behoove people to really take a step back and start looking at their finances and determining whether or not they need to sit down and have a game plan. What I have
Absolutely.
noticed in the business that we're in, many people simply do not know what to do. They just do not have a game plan. They have no idea that they can accelerate the payoff of their debt, and do it within the confines of their current lifestyle. I always advocate to many doctors that if you're going to be successful in practice, you need to have all these other things handled under control, so that you can really look at the short-term and long-term effect of the hard work you're putting in and what those monies you earn are going towards. I mean, your thoughts, Rich?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the things that I'll add to that, and I think this kind of helps encapsulate a lot of what we've talked about. Listen, folks, it, it, it's as the expression goes. People don't plan to fail; they just fail to plan. And if you have a goal without a plan, it's just a wish. And I think we all do a lot of that sometimes. We do the coulda, woulda, shouldas, but we also do the I wish this, I wish that. And this isn't a matter of just ideologically buying into a concept or a theory or just simply an idea. You've got to have proven systems and strategies that provide solutions. And again, I miss my dad a lot, and I tell you one of the great quotes he had, and he used to say it kind of tongue in cheek because he was a dry humored guy, but he said, Rich, the road to hell is paved in good intentions. Because anytime I would do something stupid, I'd be like, but Dad, I didn't plan on that. He goes, yeah, the road to hell is paved in good intentions. And I remember thinking that is very, very, very apropos for our subject, right? Because nobody plans on getting in debt. Nobody plans on lots and lots of things. But what are we doing to plan for the potential inevitability those things could occur? So it's a matter of, we use the weight example. You're a doctor, right? I mean, losing weight is not a highly complex concept. Eat less, exercise more. Now, I'm not saying it's that easy, but it is that simple. But the question is, if we go to the store and we're always hungry when we go there, we're going to buy stuff we don't want. If you keep junk food in the house, you're probably going to eat it. If you don't plan your meals in advance, you're going to go through drive-throughs for fast food. So it's the lack of planning, right? It's the lack of a systematic, consistent strategy. And I think that's one of the things that I'm the most excited about with the particular platform that we've been fortunate to work with. I've never seen anything better at helping people financially forecast and really create a virtual kind of web-based financial coach. I mean, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. That's literally what we call financial GPS.
Yes, absolutely. That unique, comprehensive financial tool. I'm kind of a tool guy. I like new technologies. I like
I
things
don't
that
think you're a
are.
tool, Chris. Not at all.
What's that?
I don't think you're a tool at all, Doc. I think you're a good dude, man.
Should ask my wife that. No, again, we talk about this all the time, Richard. The technology is caught up to the financial industry. Okay, and we can use example after example. I mean, how many people would go back to using a rotary phone? How many people would want to watch?
Most young kids wouldn't even know how to use one, as a matter of
I
fact.
know. I've told you about that video. But, I mean, you're looking at the technology across the spectrum of all the different things that we now use, we take for granted. And now we have this at our fingertips where you can literally, I mean, snap your fingers and you can see exactly what this technology can do for you.
I
And
the I add one thought if I could, Chris. I don't know if I should say this or not, but it's not. I'm not the anti-establishment guy, but it has always really, really bothered me that the power is in the hands of the few. And when you look at financial institutions, it's not a hateful thing, but banks are the biggest building you will see in any city, in any state, any country in the world that you travel to. And that's because the golden rule, right? He who has the gold makes the rules. And they have possession of the money and they know what to do with it. So our whole focus is, how do we help the average person? Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. How do we help the average person to literally bank like a bank at the push of a button? I think that's why we're so passionately excited about this concept. It literally creates the opportunity for the average person to turn the tables on the bank and implement those same proven strategies, as we've talked about, that they've been using for decades.
absolutely. And you brought. I just remember something. So when I was in clinical practice, obviously I had a banker, and he became a very good friend of mine because we would have lines of credit set up because of the cyclical nature of how we were reimbursed for the services that we provided from the insurance company. Okay, I mean, I know for a fact that there were insurance companies that actually hold on to the monies that should be paid out to doctors because they wanted to maximize uh, uh, interest accumulation on the money that was sitting, okay, in these accounts before they dispersed them to doctors to pay for the services that we had provided to our patients. But I'll never forget, this banker told me once. He said, Doc, I'm not in the banking business. I'm in the cash business. I had to kind of take a step back and go, well, of course you are. But the way that he phrased it and presented it to me, I sound like I was doing the mafia.
It's
Okay.
a little diabolical, yeah.
Right, right. But everyone, take to heart the things that we've talked about today. Remember, it is a good idea to have an emergency fund. Get educated. Open your eyes to what's going on in the economy. The information we brought forth today hopefully will kind of give you some insight. Next podcast, Rich, we're going to have a special guest, an expert in the real estate field. And I think everyone's going to enjoy that, especially learning and understanding the importance of not only having a mortgage, but being able to eliminate that debt as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say that, as a closing comment, that take action. The journey of 1,000 miles, right, begins with that first step. And sometimes, I don't care if it's as simple as maybe take an honest look at your finances, like literally sit down and take a close look at what you've spent money on just in this calendar year, just since January. I just invite you guys to just take your last 6 months of bank statements, not even counting cash and ancillary stuff, but just your last 6 months of bank statements, and begin to look at what you spend money on and where it goes. And I think that'd be a very revealing and probably very startling perspective for a lot of people, and start formulating a budget, looking for areas that, without making any significant difference, you could begin to cut back and we can begin to continue to talk about ways in which you can better leverage the use of that money effectively to not only get out of debt, Chris, but really convert that debt to wealth for financial peace of mind and security for your family.
And with that advice, that will end another episode of Debt Doctor 911. Listen, everyone, we really appreciate you listening to our podcast. Please go out and tell others. Let them know they can go to debtdoctor911.com and they can listen to all of our episodes. And also, don't forget, if you want to learn more about what you can do, as Richard talked about being proactive, go to moneymaxnow.com. That's moneymaxnow.com. And we would love to help you in the near future. So until our next podcast, Richard, have a wonderful rest of your day. And I look forward to speaking with you on our next podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much for listening to Debt Doctor 911. We hope that this episode has helped you transform the way you think, giving you new ideas, and provided you a new perspective on the desire to eliminate all of your debt and build wealth, so you can get out there and create the financial freedom you and your family deserve. If you would like to know your exact payoff date and see what our program could do for you, just go to moneymaxnow.com to schedule your free payoff analysis. That's moneymaxnow.com. Our podcast is for informational purposes only. The purpose of this podcast is to provide you with helpful information on the subjects discussed. Careful attention has been paid to ensure the accuracy of the information, but we cannot assume responsibility for the validity or consequences of its use. As each individual situation is unique, we disclaim responsibility for any adverse effects that may result from the use or application of the information discussed on this podcast. Any use of the information from this podcast is the sole responsibility of the listener. Results will vary based on an individual personal financial situation. All time and interest saving examples on this podcast are strictly hypothetical. Individual time and interest savings amounts are subject to individual qualification. No financial advice or recommendations have been made as a part of this podcast. We encourage you to seek the advice of a financial professional. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a second to rate and review. Each review helps us help more people just like you make a difference in this world. Don't forget to take a screenshot, share it in your Instagram stories, and tag us at The Debt Doctor. That's TheDebtDr, and at FinPro Advisors. That's FinProAdvisors. Finally, always remember, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. See you next week.